all the abuse in my childhood essentially happened because of my ability. So I wanted nothing to do with this at all. So when I turned back in the direction of, okay, maybe I can't run away from myself the rest of my life, it was literally as simple as I'm going to see people in my house, like occasionally on certain days, and
Mhm.
just kind of tell them what it is that I see. And
So I think a lot of people have questions though about you doing things like this, like a session or being the one to speak on such topics when you haven't had actual, um, doctorates on the subject, or you haven't gone to school for it. Which again, I can understand that train of thought, but as I listened more to you and watched more of your stuff, I realized, there are people that go to school for years, decades, and they have no life experience about what they're teaching.
yeah,
So, who's to say who is the better teacher? Someone who's been through it, lived it, knows exactly what you're feeling going through and knows exactly how they got themselves out, or someone who's been taught in a school and just read books and studied and got, did well on a test. So, so you started what in your early 20s seeing people and giving them advice, or how did
I was
that work?
26 about, yeah.
Mhm. And it made no difference that people weren't asking for credentials back then, I guess.
No, I mean, the point at which somebody goes to the alternative route, usually everything has failed them already. Every
Mm,
doctor, every therapist, it's like they're literally in a place where they're like, you know what? At this point I don't care what
mhm.
kind of needles I have to be have put in my body, what type of alternative realities I have to consider. They're pretty desperate, right?
Yeah.
Um, no, I mean I did not really run into that. It was just, people would sit down and be like, "What do you see?" And I'd tell them, and it was shocking to me the amount of information that I had that I take for granted. Which is the case when anybody has a serious gift, you know? It's
Yeah.
this way when somebody's, like, incredible at organizing, they don't even usually consider it a gift, then they go to somebody's, house who has a terrible time organizing, and that person's like, "Whoa, a superpower." So, I was no exception, and I was telling like, just sideways comments about the way the universe worked, stuff that I took for granted to such an extreme degree, and they would be like, "Whoa," and life-changing. The next week, it would be a shift like you couldn't get in 20 years of therapy with somebody, and I'm like, Okay, I am now not okay with the fact that this is where we are,
Mm.
and it's no longer okay for me that the only people who will know this information are people who have X amount of, $100 to go see somebody in person. That's not the reality for a lot of people. So I started to have this real desire to reach a large scale of people, and more than that, to be reaching people who really could not afford sessions.
Right.
That's what
Do
drove
you
me.
do you remember what your original theme on YouTube was that you started with? I mean, I know it's one thing to be a clairvoyant and talk about things that you can predict or see, but were you starting with, videos on self-help as opposed to, ancestral healing? What was the first kind of message you were sending back then?
Honestly, it was tell me what you wanna know. I mean, that's why the series, that I started was Ask Teal. It was just literally like, "You guys, I don't really have I'm not in touch with what it is that you don't know that you wanna know, so just ask me whatever," you know? And so people would submit questions, things like, "I wanna know what a ghost is," and so I'd be like, "Alright, what's a ghost?" You know? Or they'd be like, "How do I manifest better?" Okay, manifestation,
Right.
I felt like and honestly, my whole career has felt like this. It hasn't felt like I mean, obviously I have an agenda relative to human suffering, but it hasn't really felt like I have this one very serious message, and maybe that message evolves, but I have this agenda. It doesn't feel like this. It feels like this game I'm playing with humanity, like a back and forth game
Mhm.
where they hit me a ball and I'm like, "Oh, and here's the return." And they're like, "But," and then they hit a ball back and then I'm like, "Oh, here's a return." And it still feels that way. And I
Mm.
honestly, I feel like this is something that differentiates me from everyone else in this business because I feel like I'm in such a dynamic relationship with the world, basically, in what I'm doing and what I'm teaching and what I choose to prioritize and what's important on a given day.
Yeah. Did you ever think that so many people would be listening to you?
Oh, I thought a ton more would, actually. I'm actually frustrated at my level of growth, which most people would consider to be absolutely astronomical, and I'm just like, "Yeah." I thought the receptivity and desire would be much higher, when you compare it to the amount that people are suffering. So, let's say that I'm looking at a world full of millions upon millions upon millions of people who are suffering in relationships so bad,
Mhm.
and I thought, to begin with, I'm going to put out information that's going to help them, and they're just going to jump on it. And that is not the case. It seems to be that people have to get to a place where they're so willing to lose everything for the sake of truth, and then they're willing to watch the information. So,
Right. Well, do you think it's because people haven't come across you yet? Do you think it's just because people keep staying in their patterns?
it's
Why?
because people have. So I resonate at this frequency of what is real and of personal truth, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's a really scary thing. Most people don't live there, and so what you'll notice is that people, when they come across my videos, they have a kind of flirtation process that happens, where they see my image and they're like, "Whoa," but then they're like, and then like again, I pop up and they're like, and then like one day, who knows what it is in their life, they're like, "All right, I'm going to go down the rabbit hole."